Now today, no almond milk, no extra coffee, just the vanilla latte. About 80 calories, but I round it to 100 because why not? Let's drink. Enjoy. Mmm. The first time I noticed this bubble consciously was in about 2018 when I was talking to a very intelligent person who was unaware that their argument contained a hidden assumption. And then over the years, that's led me to recognize, G'day, that what is a bubble? Where are the borders of the bubble? And what makes someone being in one bubble versus in another bubble? How do you know that? You talk about it, but you don't know, Terry, what the reason is that is causing you to decide what bubble is which. And for that reason, one can end up, no matter how intelligent, how incisive, how articulate, how critical a thinker they are, can end up in a bubble that they don't know they're in. And it comes from the assumptions that we make that we don't know we're making. So why do you hear some people say it's good to talk to someone who doesn't agree with you? Well, what happens is that, what does it mean to not agree? Well, ignoring people who are maybe not logically consistent. Is it possible to have people who are logically consistent and yet have different points of view? And of course we see that that is true. And what defines that? Well, to reach a conclusion, using deductive reasoning at the very least, let's ignore all other forms of conclusion. You need to follow some logical pathway, but where is your starting point? Your starting point is actually the assumptions that you make. So I'll give you an example right now. Let's start with, if the house is big, then the people who own it must be rich. So already you can tell that there is an assumption here. The assumption, well, there's a few assumptions. One is that we're basing the wealth of the owner of the house on the size of the house, but we've also defined it as house. Now, a house to someone somewhere is going to be 3 or 4 bedrooms. A house to someone somewhere else is going to be 8 bedrooms. Now, an 8-bedroom house to someone who's used to 4-bedroom houses is not going to be a house, that's going to be a mansion. So you can't say the house is big at that point. You can say that's not a house, that's a mansion. So it's a massive house. But someone who's used to 8-bedroom houses doesn't call it a mansion. They just say that's a normal sized house. So therefore, I'm the owner of a normal sized house, so I can't be rich. So what do we have here? We have a problem where we haven't defined what it means to be rich, what it means to have a house, what it means to own a house, and assuming that there's not other forms of ownership, or that the ownership can be threatened. It also requires a stability or a stable government and a stable country that can afford ownership and have that recognized by others who also aren't going to steal it from you, or try to steal it, or be able to steal it. So there's a lot of assumptions in that one statement. And depending on the assumptions you make, you'll get people who disagree. So you'll talk to someone who has spent their whole life living in a place with 4-bedroom houses or apartments, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom. And someone else who's got an 8-bedroom house says, oh, I just got an 8-bedroom house. And then the other person says, what's wrong with you? That's not even a house, that's a mansion. How can you even talk like that? You're delusional. Hey, quiz question. And the other person says, well, I'm not delusional because we have a statement. The statement is that if you have a house and it's big, the owners must be rich. But my house isn't big because every other house around me is 12 bedrooms. I've only got an 8-bedroom. So my house is not big at all. And then the other person says, well, you spent your whole life living around houses that have 12 bedrooms that you're so delusional that you can't even see that 8 bedrooms is huge. So we have a problem here with the assumption. And therefore, if we're going to have a logical discussion, we need to revisit or go back to, hey, get a quiz question. We are defining bubbles in a way that using metrics around which we can all agree. So one of the metrics is that assuming the argument is logically consistent and assuming that both parties disagree, even though the arguments are both logically consistent, what is the difference? Well, the difference is, of course, the assumptions. But not only that, but the hidden assumptions. So I'm going to use his name because I've been listening to him for a long time. Like, I listen to many different people over a long period of time. One of them is Sam Harris. And I don't have anything negative or positive. This is not an accusation or or a kiss ass or either way or anything. It's just as a human being who's a public figure who speaks. Now, this particular person has certain assumptions when he speaks. Poor and alone, a germphobic, but had a billion. Oh, Howard Hughes ended up poor, alone, a germ. So, you know what? I'm going to take back using the name. Gab, is it pink? It could be. It could be pink. You never know. With, for example, the assumptions he makes in his arguments are assumptions that people don't bring up, and the question is why? Well, what happens is that those who support his views might not necessarily see those assumptions, and those who are against him will then might say that he's wrong. I've heard some good arguments on both sides, but what they don't include are the assumptions that are made by both parties making the arguments. So this is really the most important thing. What are your assumptions and how are they hidden? Well, I'm going to use an argument from someone back in 2018, which is what started this whole process. Cheers. Beautiful. So the argument was about how it's not fair that some states in America have less population, equilibrium for all. Well, I don't know necessarily what equilibrium means. I don't think it's actually obtainable, equilibrium, because equilibrium by one metric means disequilibrium by another metric, and it depends on which metric one values. And the question is, why does one value it? And I think that comes back to human psychology. So that's actually a really good point. I'm going to use that point. There was a person saying to me that, it's not fair that some states in America have less people but get more voting power as a state. And that means that the individuals in the state have communism is obtainable. No, I think, isn't obtainable. Yeah, true, correct. So in theory, in order to obtain some goals, other things are sacrificed. So yes, this is also true. And in terms of so coming back to the person about the voting, they said that as a consequence, individuals are getting less of a vote. So in the states where there are more people, or more population density. And the answer is yes, this is true. But if you then give every individual an equal vote independent of state, then some states will have more power than other states. So the point here is not that one is right and one isn't right. The point is that depending on the metric you want, the other one is going to be sacrificed. It is impossible by definition to have the states having equal power and each individual having the same voting power irrespective of population density, unless you have a closure on both those metrics. And what does that mean? It means, where do they intersect? Where do they intersect? There's one point that I can think of live at the moment. Can anyone guess? Let's see. They intersect if every single state had exactly the same amount of voting adults in it. And that's when you say, okay, now we can satisfy both problems. So this is an issue when you have two problems that are independent of each other to a large degree, where they intersect, if they're not parallel, assuming that it's one point of intersection, is a subset of the entire possibility. So by doing that, you have to enforce some sort of control. And that's where Terry Nee was saying you end up with communism, or the results of the attempts at communism, I should say, not necessarily communism itself, but the way humans apply it, of course, comes to that point. Because you're ignoring the mathematics of the hidden assumptions, which intersect on a lower dimension. A benevolent dictator. Yeah. Well, I believe there are competitors for that. So next time, for example, someone says they have an argument, try and notice the hidden assumptions in their argument as opposed to pulling them out, because it helps you notify yourself of the hidden assumptions in your own argument. So you'll hear someone say, we should do this because they are this, or this is this. But what it does is it makes certain assumptions. So, for example, some people have an assumption that some nations act for good reason, as opposed to another reason that might be a bit more cynical. Now, there is no way to prove which one is true, but notice that you're making an assumption, not you, but a person in their argument, saying we need to go here, for example, because they are bad. And now in that assumption, it is saying that there's some sort of external authority, the side on which you are on. And of course, we know in history that that is something that is common to mutual antagonists as well. So it's not necessarily a reason to think one is correct. But anyway, that's all I wanted to say. So we now, I guess, can look at what it means to be in a certain bubble via not the logic, but via the assumptions that we make that we don't realize we're making. Maybe have a look for that in the opposing narratives. Whatever, it doesn't matter to me, whatever side you particular on. It's a tightrope walk. Yes, that's a very good analogy. It's a tightrope walk, absolutely. It's very difficult. If it wasn't difficult, we wouldn't have all of these problems, I guess. And again, that's an assumption because I'm defining difficulty by our humans' inability to solve it cleanly. And any more advanced being down the track might not see it as difficult at all. So another assumption. All right, well, that's my coffee. Got to go to work. First day in an additional job, mentoring those who, like myself, neurodiverse at university. Very exciting. Take life one smack at a time.